There's a moment in life not marked by shouting, not by slamming doors, not even by bitter arguments, but by a silence so loud it changes everything. It happens when someone you trusted looks right at your worth and still chooses to treat you like you're disposable. You didn't get an apology. You didn't get an explanation. You got something far clearer: their disregard. Disrespect is a language. And when people stop pretending, when the mask slips and their tone changes, when your presence becomes something they tolerate instead of value, that is your closure. It hurts because it speaks louder than betrayal. It says, I thought you'd stay no matter how I treated you. But now you've heard it. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. This is not the end of your worth. It's the beginning of your awakening. Their disrespect was a confession. Disrespect is not always loud. It often arrives quietly, through delays in responses, through forgotten commitments, through subtle digs masked as jokes. At first, it doesn't seem like much. You tell yourself they're just tired, busy, or distracted. You excuse it because you want to believe the best in them. But over time, it adds up, and what was once a rare moment of coldness becomes a pattern of indifference. When someone starts to treat you with casual disregard, it's easy to fall into denial. You want to hold on to the relationship, the history, the hope. So you downplay the way they ignore your voice in conversations, how they roll their eyes at your excitement, or dismiss your feelings as overreactions. You internalize their disrespect like it's your fault, like you're asking for too much by expecting to be treated with care. But here's the truth. Disrespect is never accidental. It is not a slip of the tongue or a forgotten obligation. It is a message. And whether they say it consciously or not, it always reveals the same thing. They no longer feel the need to protect your dignity. And in that moment, whether you realize it or not, they're confessing something. They're telling you they've stopped valuing you the way you still value them. You see, the most honest parts of people emerge when they stop trying to impress you. When the early charm fades and the masks fall off, you're left with the reality of who they are when they think they've secured your loyalty. That's when their true nature speaks. Through apathy, condescension, avoidance. Disrespect is the tone of someone who thinks you're not going anywhere, no matter how little effort they give. It's not about conflict. It's about comfort. They've become comfortable enough to stop pretending to care. And that's why it's so painful. Because you begin to understand that what you thought was real may have been situational. You realize that your loyalty was never mutual. It was convenient for them as long as you were easy to use, easy to lean on, easy to forget. But when your needs start to show, when you stop shrinking yourself, when you begin to ask for reciprocity, that's when the disrespect surfaces. Not because you changed, but because you stopped making their comfort your priority. This is the hardest part to accept, that someone can outgrow their respect for you, not because you failed them, but because they were never committed to honoring you in the first place. They were committed to what they could extract: attention, validation, support. And once they had it, they grew indifferent to maintaining the bond that brought it. Their disrespect becomes the clearest sign that the connection was built on convenience, not character. Some people will never say, I'm done with you. They'll just start showing it in how they talk to you, how they show up late without apology, how they stop checking in, how they mock your boundaries. That is closure. That is them saying, You're no longer someone I need to handle with care. You don't need a breakup or a final argument to recognize that a bond has ended. Disrespect is the farewell. The challenge is in recognizing it early and resisting the urge to chase clarity from someone who already gave it. Their behavior has spoken. Every time they dismiss you, every time they minimize your presence, they are handing you an answer, no matter how much they try to dress it in indifference. Waiting for a formal goodbye, and they won't, they don't need to. This is the moment you reclaim your power, not by confronting them or seeking revenge, but by no longer requiring their acknowledgement. You begin to see that their disrespect was not about you lacking something, it was about them lacking the capacity to value you deeply. And that recognition, painful as it is, sets you free. You start to understand that silence can be sacred, that no response is still a message, that someone ignoring your worth is not something to tolerate, it's something to walk away from. Disrespect is not just offensive, it's informative. It tells you exactly where you stand in someone's life, and once you know, it's your responsibility to act on that knowledge. Because the longer you stay where you're not respected, the more you begin to mirror the treatment you receive. You start lowering your voice, your needs, your expectations. You shrink to fit inside the version of yourself that they can tolerate. But you weren't made to live tolerated. You were made to be honored. And anyone who can't do that is offering you a door, not a dilemma. Let them speak through their silence. Let them confess through their disrespect. You don't need their goodbye when their actions already screamed it. When usefulness replaces love, there's a deeply uncomfortable truth that many people come to learn not through theory, but through the ache of experience. Sometimes what you thought was love was actually usefulness. You weren't cherished, you were convenient. And as long as you kept playing your role, being available, saying yes, being strong, they stayed close. But the moment you needed to be held, instead of holding everyone else, their energy shifted. In the beginning, people admire your strength. They lean on your generosity, your consistency, your willingness to go the extra mile. You become the listener, the problem solver, the anchor. It feels good, even fulfilling, to be needed. But slowly something shifts. You start to notice that your own needs are invisible. When you reach out, they're busy. When you're hurting, they disappear. When you finally say, "I'm tired," they look at you as if you've changed. But you haven't changed. You've simply stopped performing. You've stopped giving beyond your capacity. And that's when it hits you. Their love wasn't unconditional. It was dependent on your utility. They weren't invested in you. They were invested in what you could provide. Once your usefulness faded, so did their affection. This realization is painful because it exposes how unbalanced the relationship truly was. You gave from a place of sincerity. You showed up without calculating how much you'd get in return. But for them, it was always transactional. You were a source, not a soul. And when the well ran dry, they left, not with anger, but with indifference. That's what hurts most. It's not that they fought to stay. It's that they didn't even hesitate to leave. Love that is built on usefulness is not real love. It's dependence masked as intimacy. It's the illusion of connection, not the reality of commitment. When someone loves you, truly loves you, your presence is not tied to your performance. You don't have to earn your place in their life by constantly giving. You are valued even in your silence, your rest, your weakness. But when love is conditional on your utility, the moment you stop producing is the moment you become disposable. This is where many people get trapped. They begin to feel guilty for needing rest, for setting boundaries, for no longer showing up the same way. They internalize the withdrawal of others as a personal failure. But the truth is, stepping back didn't create the distance, it revealed it. Your value in their life was never about who you were, it was about what you did. And the moment you stopped doing, the illusion shattered. This can be a wake-up call. Because when you realize how many of your relationships are rooted in functionality, you start to question the depth of your connections. Who would still be here if you had nothing to offer? Who sees you not as a resource, but as a human being with needs, emotions, and limits? These questions are uncomfortable, but they're necessary. They clear out the noise. They expose the truth. And the truth is always the beginning of healing. People often say if they loved you, they wouldn't have left. But sometimes the love was never there to begin with. It was just a system of convenience. You were loyal, you were dependable, you were available. And that was enough to keep them around. But the moment you needed more than you gave, the balance tipped, and they didn't want to carry the weight. This teaches you something vital, not about them, but about yourself. It teaches you to stop mistaking being needed for being loved. It reminds you that your worth isn't defined by how useful you are to others. You have value even when you're still, even when you're quiet, even when you have nothing to give. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise is not loving you, they're using you. The pain of this truth is sharp, but it's also clarifying, because once you see it, you can no longer unsee it. You start to recognize the subtle dynamics in your relationships. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. You stop apologizing for not being available. You stop sacrificing yourself to maintain connections that only exist when you're giving. And most importantly, you stop begging for love that vanishes when you become human. When usefulness replaces love, the burden becomes unbearable. You live in fear of becoming too tired, too emotional, too unavailable. You begin to shape-shift into whatever version of yourself they find most beneficial. But the cost of that is your authenticity. You lose your center trying to hold everyone else together. And eventually you look in the mirror and realize you're exhausted, not just physically, but spiritually. That's where change begins. In the exhaustion, in the silence, in the moment when you say, I can't keep doing this. And even if they leave, even if they ghost you, even if they move on without a word, that's still a gift. Because now you know. Now you're free. And freedom, though painful at first, is always better than living in a cage made of someone else's conditions. So don't mourn the ones who left when you stop being useful. They were never truly with you. Instead, give gratitude for the clarity. Their absence is not your loss, it's your liberation. Closure that screams through silence. You're taught to believe that closure comes wrapped in words, that it arrives in a final conversation, a heartfelt apology, or an honest explanation. We wait for it like a doorbell that never rings, hoping someone will eventually return to explain why they changed, why they hurt us, why they walked away. But more often than not, closure doesn't come from the people who broke us. It comes from the silence they leave behind. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from being ignored, not in an accidental way, but in a deliberate one. It's when someone who once couldn't go a day without talking to you suddenly becomes a stranger. No argument, no fallout, no reason you can wrap your mind around. Just distance. And in that distance, you search for meaning. You replay conversations, overanalyze texts, and dissect every moment, trying to figure out what went wrong. But what you're really doing is trying to make sense of the silence. Because silence, when you expected care, feels like cruelty. But silence is not empty, it's full. Full of the words they chose not to say, the decency they chose not to show, and the honesty they decided you didn't deserve. It's a decision, not an accident. And in that decision is a truth you need to face. Some people don't leave with dignity because they never truly valued the connection in the first place. They disappear, not because they're confused, but because they don't want to be accountable. And that silence, that's their closure. It's just not the one you were hoping for. The absence of words becomes the loudest confirmation. Because when someone can walk away without looking back, when they can vanish without explanation, it speaks volumes. It tells you that they weren't emotionally invested. It tells you that your pain wasn't enough to pull them into a moment of honesty. And most of all, it tells you that they didn't see you as someone worth the effort of resolution. And that is the hardest truth to sit with. Not that they left, but that they left so easily. That they could witness your loyalty, your kindness, your vulnerability, and still exit without a single attempt to honor it. That's not confusion, that's clarity. You were never as important to them as they were to you. And while that truth cuts deep, it's also the truth that will eventually set you free. Closure doesn't need their cooperation. It doesn't require a neatly tied ending. In fact, some of the most powerful closure you'll ever receive will be the moment you stop waiting for them to make it make sense. Because when someone chooses silence, they're already telling you everything. They're showing you their values, their maturity, their capacity or lack thereof to love with depth and courage. And the moment you accept that, you stop needing more. The silence they left you with is not a question. It's an answer. It tells you who they are, but more importantly, it tells you what you deserve. You deserve someone who won't vanish when things get difficult. You deserve someone who will face discomfort, not avoid it. You deserve someone who sees you not as temporary comfort, but as a human being worthy of respect, even in parting. Letting go of the idea of a perfect goodbye is part of your healing. You may never hear the apology. You may never get the reason. And that's okay. Because the truth is, people who hurt you in silence would never have offered a truth that helped you heal. Their version of closure would have likely caused more confusion, more manipulation, more blame. Their silence, as brutal as it is, spares you from further entanglement. It forces you to rely on yourself for the ending they couldn't give you. And relying on yourself is the beginning of real power. You start to realize that closure isn't a gift someone else gives you. It's a choice you make. It's the moment you decide that their silence no longer deserves your obsession, that their absence is no longer the center of your story, that their lack of explanation is no longer a reflection of your worth but of theirs. You begin to shift the energy. You stop checking for their updates. You stop stalking the silence for signs of remorse. You stop waiting. Because now you know what they didn't say was just as loud as anything they could have. It was a declaration. One that hurt, yes, but also one that liberated you from illusions. Silence becomes your teacher. It teaches you who not to chase. It teaches you to listen not just to words, but to behavior. It teaches you that those who leave quietly were never meant to stay loudly. And most of all, it teaches you to become your own closure, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. So let the silence speak. Let it scream if it must, but don't let it own you. Use it, learn from it, grow beyond it. Because the loudest closure isn't a conversation. It's your decision to move on, even when the answers never come, when they think you won't leave. There's a dangerous kind of comfort people slip into when they believe you'll never leave. They start testing boundaries they never would have dared to cross in the beginning. They become careless with their words, reckless with your feelings, and distant in ways that don't match the closeness you once shared. It's not always immediate. It builds slowly, almost silently, until one day you realize you're being treated like an afterthought, not because you changed, but because they assume you wouldn't. When someone becomes convinced of your permanent loyalty, they stop earning it. They begin to treat your presence as a given, not a gift. They assume you'll always be there, to answer the call, to forgive the mistake, to overlook the insult. And this belief that your commitment is unconditional regardless of their behavior creates entitlement. It allows them to keep taking without giving, to keep demanding without appreciating, to keep wounding without repairing. This isn't love. This is complacency in its most toxic form. It's a mindset that says, I don't have to try anymore. And when people stop trying, the relationship stops growing. One-sided effort slowly suffocates the connection. But the most heartbreaking part? They don't even notice. Because in their mind, you're not going anywhere. They've mistaken your loyalty for weakness. They think your kindness is endless. They see your silence as approval and your patience as passivity. But here's what they forget. Even the strongest hearts have limits. Just because someone stays silent doesn't mean they're blind. Just because someone keeps showing up doesn't mean they're not hurting. There's a breaking point in every soul. And when it's reached, it doesn't explode, it quietly exits. Because the people who held everything together for so long don't usually leave in chaos. They leave with calm, not to punish, but to protect themselves. When they think you won't leave, they stop being careful. And when someone stops being careful with your heart, it's only a matter of time before you begin to withdraw. At first, it's subtle. You stop sharing the little things. You stop offering pieces of yourself to someone who no longer values them. You stop initiating because you're tired of being met with indifference. And then one day, you stop altogether, not out of anger, but out of clarity. You see them for what they are, someone who never truly believed you had the strength to walk away. But you do. And that realization is where your power begins to rise. Because leaving isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. It's not a slammed door. It's the sound of nothing. No more calls, no more texts, no more trying to be heard in a room where your voice was ignored. You simply stop explaining your worth to someone who is never listening in the first place. What they didn't realize is that every time they disrespected you and you stayed, you weren't breaking. You were measuring. You were taking note. You were learning the pattern. And when the scale tipped too far, when the weight of neglect became heavier than the hope you were holding on to, you chose to let go. That choice was not impulsive. It was earned over time by their consistent disregard. They'll be shocked. They always are. Because people who take you for granted never expect you to outgrow them. They expect you to stay in the cycle. They expect you to keep shrinking your needs, suppressing your truth, minimizing your hurt, just to keep the peace. But peace that comes at the cost of your self-respect is not peace at all. It's self-abandonment disguised as harmony. And you've done that long enough When they realize you're gone, truly gone, it won't be the absence that stings the most. It will be the realization that they pushed away someone who would have stayed forever if they had just shown up with effort. That they treated a rare soul like a common one. That they gambled with loyalty and lost. And by the time they understand what they had, you'll be too far into your healing to return to what broke you. You see, the greatest shift happens when you stop proving your worth and start protecting it. When you stop trying to convince someone to treat you right and instead choose to no longer tolerate what drains you, that decision, that silent departure, is the loudest act of self-respect you'll ever make. And it's not about revenge. It's not about making them hurt. It's about finally putting yourself in a space where you're not constantly doubting your value. Where love doesn't come with terms and affection isn't rationed. Where your presence is met with presence and your soul is met with care, not convenience. Let them think you'd never leave. Let them build their illusion on the false belief that your loyalty has no limits. Because when you finally walk away, not in anger, but in peace, they will hear the sound of every ignored moment echo in your absence. And that will be the closure they never expected, but the one they earned, the revenge of your absence. People rarely understand the weight of your presence until it's gone. They don't fully grasp what your energy did for their life, the peace it brought, the patience it offered, the stability it anchored, until the silence sets in. And then it hits them. Not with a loud bang, but with a slow creeping realization. The very thing they thought they could live without becomes the thing they can't stop thinking about. That is the revenge of your absence. You never raised your voice. You didn't slam doors. You didn't beg for them to understand your worth. You simply left, quietly, intentionally. And in that silence, something began to unravel for them. They started to feel the void you used to fill, the conversations that no longer happen, the support that is no longer there, the warmth that's been replaced with a cold distance. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds just like the way they took you for granted. There's a unique kind of revenge that doesn't require bitterness. You don't have to wish them harm. You don't have to make dramatic statements. All you have to do is stop showing up for someone who expected you to always be there. That absence begins to echo louder than any confrontation ever could. And the beauty of it is, it's not meant to hurt them. It's meant to finally honor you. You see, your presence was never neutral. It was healing. It was grounding. It brought life into dull spaces. It softened harsh realities. And it gave others a safe place to land. But when people become entitled to that, they stop seeing it for what it is. They treat your light like it's permanent, like it will always be there no matter how they behave. That assumption is their mistake. Because nothing is more powerful than someone who knows when to walk away and means it. When you remove yourself, you remove the cushion, the emotional labor you carried, the peace you created, the space you held when no one else did. And they start to feel it. Not right away, but eventually, because people can only thrive off your strength for so long before the absence of it starts to weaken them. Now, that's not about revenge in the traditional sense. That's about consequence. And consequences teach better than any argument. They'll begin to revisit the moments when they dismissed your concerns, ignored your needs, or treated your consistency like it was owed. They'll remember the messages left on read, the apologies that never came, and the effort that was never returned. And each memory will remind them of what they lost. Not just you, but the version of themselves that existed when they were with you. Someone better, someone softer, someone more whole. Your absence makes them confront who they are without you. And for some, that realization is unbearable, because when you were in their life, they didn't have to face their own emotional immaturity. They didn't have to sit with their apathy. They didn't have to do the inner work. You were doing it for both of you. You were holding the relationship together with hands that were already bleeding, and they didn't notice until you stopped. That's when they start to feel everything they once brushed off. Every time they rolled their eyes at your pain, every time they responded with silence instead of support, every time they dismissed your tears as overreaction. All those moments become mirrors, not of who you were, but of who they failed to be. That reflection becomes their discomfort, and no amount of distraction can silence it. But by then, you're already gone. Not just physically, but emotionally. You're no longer asking why. You're no longer hoping they'll understand. You're no longer reaching back. You've made peace with the fact that sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is walking away from what continually devalues you. And that peace, that quiet self-trust, becomes your strength. The revenge of your absence isn't about making them suffer. It's about finally removing yourself from a cycle that drained you. It's about letting their loss do the talking. Because while you heal, they'll revisit every ignored effort you made, every grace you extended, every part of yourself you gave. And they'll realize they weren't just careless. They were given something rare and didn't know how to hold it. Eventually, they might try to come back, not out of love, but out of regret. Not because they've changed, but because they finally understand what your presence meant. But by then, you won't be waiting. Not because you're bitter, but because you've grown. You've learned that being available to people who only value you in hindsight is a betrayal of your healing. And this time, you choose you. But that's what your absence teaches. Not just them, but you. It reminds you that your energy is sacred. Your time is valuable. Your heart is not a resource to be drained and discarded. You are not replaceable. You never were. And anyone who treats you as if you are will eventually come to learn just how deeply your presence mattered, once it's no longer theirs to have.